All right, let's dive into something that might sound a little wild at first. We're going to connect two places you'd probably never, ever put in the same sentence: the Amazon rainforest and Silicon Valley. But stick with me, because how they're connected reveals a powerful story about our world, and it might just change the way you see, well, everything.
So, really, what could they possibly have in common? On the one hand, you've got this ancient, massive, living jungle, the very symbol of the natural world. And on the other, a hypermodern grid of glass and steel, the absolute heart of our digital future. It seems like a total mismatch, right? But what if they're both struggling with the exact same fundamental problem?
Just look at the contrast. The Amazon, it's this ancient ecosystem, a huge climate regulator for the entire planet, and it all works through these natural flowing systems. Then you have Silicon Valley, the global engine of innovation, built on this really geometric, data-driven logic. They are, on paper, polar opposites. Okay, so to start solving this puzzle, let's head down to South America. We're going to look at the Amazon, but not just as a bunch of trees. We need to see it as this incredibly complex and, as it turns out, deeply fragile web of life.
You know, when we hear about the Amazon, our minds instantly go to deforestation, right? Chainsaws, burning forests, and yeah, that's a huge, huge threat. But the real story is so much deeper and honestly more complex. It's about all the invisible connections that hold the entire ecosystem together, and they're starting to fray. So get a load of this number: 20 billion. Every single day, the trees in the Amazon pump 20 billion tons of water vapor into the atmosphere. That's more water than the Amazon River itself dumps into the ocean. It creates these things scientists call flying rivers that literally shape weather patterns across the whole continent. It's this massive, invisible job that the forest is doing all the time.
And that right there brings us to our first big idea: interdependence. In the Amazon, you can't separate one thing from another. The rain that falls in the Andes Mountains feeds the rivers give life to the forest, and the forest, with its 20 billion tons of water vapor, makes more rain. They're not separate events, they're all part of one single, co-arising system.
But here's where it gets dangerous. When you damage one piece of an interdependent system, you kick off a really nasty feedback loop. You cut down trees, which means less water vapor goes up. That leads to less rain, which means more drought. And of course, drier forests are basically tinderboxes, so you get more fires, which leads to, you guessed it, more deforestation. It's a vicious cycle that pushes the entire system closer and closer to a tipping point it can never come back from.
Okay, hold on to that idea of feedback loops. We're going to take a sharp turn and jump thousands of miles north to California, because it turns out a very different kind of system is also breaking down under its own pressure.
You know, Silicon Valley wasn't just born this way. A century ago, it was literally a valley of fruit orchards. They called it the Valley of Heart's Delight. Then came the defense industry and university research that kickstarted the whole semiconductor thing. And that, of course, paved the way for the PC, the internet boom of the 90s, and now this absolute explosion in AI and biotech. It's a story of constant, relentless change.
And this brings us to our second key concept for today: becoming. Silicon Valley's true identity isn't static at all. It's this permanent state of transformation. It is always in the process of becoming something new, always shedding its skin. And that incredible energy is the source of all its power, but it's also the source of its biggest problems.
Because that relentless becoming creates this huge paradox. You've got absolutely world-changing innovation happening right next door to a housing crisis so bad that teachers, firefighters, even some tech workers can't afford to live there. The middle class is getting squeezed out, creating this hourglass economy. A few super wealthy people at the top, a whole lot of low-wage service workers at the bottom, and almost nothing in between.
So why can't the wealthiest place on the planet figure this out? Well, because just like the Amazon, its systems are failing. See, Silicon Valley isn't one city. It's dozens of different towns and counties, all making their own rules. There's no one in charge of managing the regional mess of traffic, housing, and inequality that the tech boom created. The system is literally buckling under the weight of its own success.
Okay, so we've got a fraying natural ecosystem in South America and a fracturing social ecosystem in California. How on earth are these two things related? Well, this is where we get to the big reveal.
It turns out both of these crises are just different symptoms of the same root problem. We've been looking at them in isolation. Deforestation over here, a housing crisis over there. But what we've been missing is the bigger picture, the health of the underlying system itself.
The theory that connects all this is called sustainable, resilient regionalization. Yeah, I know, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's a whole new way of seeing the world. It asks us to stop looking at regions as just static places on a map, and instead see them for what they really are: complex, evolving, and interconnected living systems, whether they're made of trees or transistors.
So this framework has a few parts, but let's just focus on 3. First, interdependence, which we saw so clearly in the Amazon. That idea that everything is tangled up in a web of feedback loops. Second, becoming, which basically defines Silicon Valley, that constant state of transformation. And third, this really crucial idea called ethical praxis.
And ethical praxis is all about this quote. It means the way we choose to see a place, the story we tell about it. That's a moral and political act. It's not neutral. If we only see the Amazon as a pile of lumber, we'll chop it down. If we only see Silicon Valley as an engine for profit, we'll ignore the human cost. How we see the world directly shapes what we do in it.
So what? What does this all actually mean for us? How can we take this new way of seeing things and use it to make better choices for our own communities and, for the planet? The most important thing to get is that this theory, it isn't some magic formula. It's not a map with a perfect route all planned out for you. It's much more like a compass. It doesn't tell you exactly where to go, but it helps you get your bearings, so you can start asking better questions and navigate all this complexity a little more wisely.
So how do you actually use this compass? Well, it kind of boils down to 3 steps. 1, see the interconnections. Look for those hidden feedback loops in your own city or town. 2, embrace constant change. Accept that our communities are always in a state of becoming. And 3, act with intention, knowing that how you talk about and engage with your home actually shapes its future.
And honestly, this shift in how we see things is incredibly powerful, because once we start seeing our regions, from the Amazon to Silicon Valley and everywhere in between, as living, breathing systems, we can finally stop playing whack-a-mole with the symptoms. We can start getting at the root causes of our biggest challenges and hopefully build healthier, more resilient communities for everyone.
So, I guess that just leaves us with one final question to chew on. What's the story of your region? What are its interconnections? How is it becoming? And how could seeing it as a living system help you and everyone around you shape a better future for it? Thanks for digging into this with us today.